In 1986, a young woman named Sherri Rasmussen was found murdered in her own home. She was a dedicated nurse, just beginning to build her future, but within days, her life would be cut short in a brutal and mysterious way. Los Angeles, city of dreams, where anything can happen. But for Sherri Rasmussen, her dreams were about to end in a tragedy no one could have predicted. It was the evening of February 24, 1986, when Sherri Rasmussen's parents received the phone call no parent should ever get. Their 29-year-old daughter was dead. Sherri had just finished a long shift at the hospital. She lived with her husband, John, in a modest home, but something was terribly wrong that night. Inside, police found Sherri's lifeless body on the floor of the living room. She had been shot multiple times, close range. There was no sign of a struggle. It looked like she had been ambushed. The police were confused. There were no signs of forced entry. Her husband, John, was nowhere to be found. Could it have been a robbery gone wrong? Or was something much darker at play? The investigation began, but leads were scarce. The more they dug, the more questions they had. Sherri was well liked. No enemies, no past relationships that would suggest danger. She had a few co-workers who were concerned, but nothing concrete. We need to know where you were on the night your wife was murdered. John Rasmussen seemed devastated by his wife's death, but there were inconsistencies in his story. He claimed to be at a nearby gym at the time of the murder, but no one could verify his alibi. But John wasn't the only person who had a connection to Sherri. Detectives soon learned of another name, a name that would change everything. A breakthrough came when detectives learned of a woman who had once been involved with John, his ex-girlfriend, a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. She was a former LAPD officer, a highly trained detective with connections in the department. At first, Stephanie seemed like an unlikely suspect. She had moved on with her life and had no known motive to harm Sherri. But detectives were about to learn that sometimes jealousy and obsession can drive people to do the unthinkable. The case went cold. Year after year, the murder of Sherri Rasmussen seemed destined to remain a mystery. But in the early 2000s, new advancements in forensic science would bring the case back to life. DNA testing had come a long way. Detectives were able to revisit the evidence, including a blood sample found at the scene. What they discovered next would shake the investigation to its core. In 2009, a breakthrough came. The DNA found on the crime scene did not match John Rasmussen, but it did match someone else, Stephanie Lazarus. Detectives were stunned. How could this former cop, who had worked alongside them, be involved in the murder of Sherri Rasmussen? After 23 years, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested for the murder of Sherri Rasmussen. The case had been solved, but the truth was stranger than anyone could have imagined. What was Stephanie's motive? It was revealed that she had never gotten over John. Their relationship had ended years before, but Stephanie had never truly moved on. When John married Sherri, Stephanie's jealousy turned to obsession. She couldn't bear to see the man she loved with someone else. In the end, Stephanie Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder. But the question remains, how could a trained police officer, someone sworn to protect the law, commit such a crime? Sherri Rasmussen's family had waited more than 2 decades for justice. But even after the conviction, one thing was clear. The darkness that had overshadowed Sherri's life could never be fully erased. This is the story of Sherri Rasmussen, an innocent woman whose life was stolen by jealousy and betrayal, and a case that remained unsolved for more than 20 years, until science, persistence, and a shocking revelation finally brought her killer to justice. The truth always finds a way to surface, even after the longest of waits.